Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. My eyes locked onto the dusty curtain, swaying lightly though no breeze touched the room. Shadows played tricks in the corners, and the air carried a whisper of anticipation, but no words. The floor was silent under my shoes, the walls too taut to reveal their secrets. I listened to the silence, waiting for it to offer a sign, each second stretched, holding its breath. The door creaked slightly on its hinges, an apology for its silence, yet it had been still moments ago. Had it moved? I couldn't remember that sound earlier, but now it lingered in the air, a question unanswered. The fabric feels different now, heavier. When I first touched it was that yesterday or weeks ago it seemed lighter, almost weightless between my fingers. Memory shifts like sand. I remember her voice through the telephone, how it cracked when she said the word missing. Or maybe she said lost. The distinction matters, though I can't recall why. I used to think investigations were about finding answers, linear progressions from question to solution. But standing here, watching dust motes dance in afternoon light that shouldn't exist in this windowless space, I understand that some cases don't resolve. They dissolve, becoming part of you like sediment in still water. The notebook in my jacket pocket contains 17 pages of observations. I count them obsessively, as if the number might change, might reveal something I missed. Page 7 has a coffee stain shaped like a bird. Page 12 is torn at the corner. Did I do that, or was it already damaged when I bought it? These details feel crucial, though I can't explain why. She lived alone, the woman who called. I visited her apartment twice, maybe 3 times. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and something else, something medicinal. She kept her hands folded when she spoke, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles went white. Her story changed each time, small variations that might have been natural inconsistencies or deliberate omissions. He always came home, she said during our first conversation. Then later, he usually came home. By the third telling, he said he would come home. The progression haunts me, how certainty erodes, how memory reshapes itself to accommodate doubt. I found myself returning to that room, the one with the curtain. Not officially the case was closed or suspended or simply forgotten. The distinction blurs in my mind like watercolors bleeding into each other. I came back because something felt unfinished, a sentence without punctuation. The building superintendent gave me access, though I'm not sure I asked for it properly. He seemed to know why I was there before I explained. His keys jangled as he walked, a sound that echoed longer than it should have in the narrow hallway. He left me alone without instructions, as if my purpose was self-evident. The room was smaller than I remembered, furniture covered in sheets, white shapes that could have been anything. I lifted one corner of a sheet and found a chair, wooden with a worn velvet seat. The fabric was burgundy, or had been once. Now it looked more like dried blood, though that comparison disturbs me. I don't usually think in such terms. There was a photograph on the mantelpiece, face down. I remember reaching for it, then stopping. Some discoveries can't be undone. The frame was silver, tarnished at the edges. My fingerprints are probably still on it, though I never turned it over. Some knowledge feels too heavy to carry. The case files mention a witness, someone who saw him leaving the building on the night in question. But when I tried to locate this person, no one seemed to know who I meant. The apartment number in my notes led to an empty unit, keys still hanging on hooks inside the door. The mailbox had no name, just accumulated flyers for businesses that no longer existed. I began to question my own documentation. Had I transcribed the information incorrectly? The handwriting looked like mine, but handwriting can be deceptive. We change subtly, constantly. The person who wrote those notes might have been a different version of myself, one with different assumptions, different blind spots. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake, reconstructing conversations, trying to identify the moment when clarity slipped away. There was something about his work schedule, irregular hours, that made his absence initially unremarkable. She waited 2 days before calling anyone, or was it 3 days? The timeline kept shifting, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. The curtain moved again, I'm certain this time, though the certainty feels hollow. There are no windows in this room, no vents, no logical source of air movement, yet the fabric sways with deliberate rhythm as if responding to breathing. The thought makes my skin prickle, though I don't believe in supernatural explanations. Everything has a cause, even if we can't perceive it. I started carrying a small tape recorder, hoping to capture evidence of these anomalies. But when I played back the recordings, they contained only silence and the sound of my own breathing. The mechanical clicks of the device starting and stopping seemed unnaturally loud, intrusive. I wondered if I was documenting the wrong things, focusing on effects while ignoring causes. Her phone calls became more frequent. Always at odd hours, her voice increasingly strained. She would ask if I had found anything new, though she never specified what she hoped I might discover. Sometimes she would mention details that contradicted her earlier statements: a different color shirt, a different time of departure, a different expression on his face during their last conversation. "You have to understand," she said during one late-night call, "he wasn't the kind of person who just disappeared." But what kind of person was he? Her descriptions painted contradictory portraits: responsible but impulsive, predictable but mysterious, devoted but distant. I began to suspect she was describing different people, or perhaps different versions of the same person across time. The investigation stalled not from lack of evidence, but from an abundance of contradictory information. Every lead branched into multiple possibilities, each equally plausible and equally unlikely. I felt like I was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from different boxes, forcing connections that didn't quite fit. I visited the room again during a rainstorm. Water leaked through the ceiling in 3 places, creating small pools on the hardwood floor. The sound was rhythmic, almost musical. I found myself listening for patterns, for messages encoded in the irregular dripping. This was when I first questioned my own objectivity, when I recognized how desperately I wanted the case to mean something. The curtain was different that day, still dusty, still moving without apparent cause, but somehow more present, more insistent. I approached it slowly, the way one might approach a sleeping animal. When I touched the fabric, it felt warm, as if it had been hanging in sunlight. But the room remained windowless, lit only by a single overhead bulb that cast harsh shadows in all directions. Behind the curtain was a wall, nothing more. But the wallpaper was peeling in one corner, revealing layers beneath different patterns, different colors, different eras. I counted 5 distinct layers before losing track. How many families had lived here? How many stories had these walls absorbed? I found myself thinking about accumulation, about how places store memory in ways we don't fully understand. Maybe the movement of the curtain wasn't supernatural, but archaeological, the physical manifestation of all the air that had ever moved through this space, all the breath that had ever been drawn and released within these walls. The notebook grew heavier in my pocket. I added observations compulsively, though I was no longer sure what I was observing. Page 18 contained a single word: presence. I don't remember writing it, but the handwriting was unmistakably mine. The ink was different, though blue instead of black. When had I switched pens? She stopped calling. The silence was more disturbing than her late-night conversations had been. I tried calling her, but the number was disconnected. When I visited her apartment, a different name was on the mailbox. The new tenant, a young man with paint-stained fingers, claimed to have lived there for months. He had never heard of my caller, showed no recognition when I described her. This was when the case began to turn inward, when external investigation became internal archaeology. I started questioning not just the facts, but my perception of them. Had I imagined the consistency of her voice across multiple calls? Had I invented details to create coherence where none existed? The building superintendent was gone too, replaced by someone who insisted no one matching his description had ever worked there. The keys I remembered, the jangling sound that echoed too long in narrow hallways had I dreamed them. The replacement showed me employment records going back years. No gaps, no mysteries, no trace of the man who had given me access to the room. I continued visiting anyway, though I was no longer sure how I gained entry. The door was always unlocked when I arrived, always locked when I left. I never saw anyone else in the building, though I sometimes heard footsteps in adjacent apartments, voices through thin walls speaking in languages I couldn't identify. The curtain became my focus, my anchor point in an increasingly fluid reality. It was the one constant, the single element that remained unchanged while everything else shifted around it. I measured its movements, timed its oscillations, searched for mathematical patterns that might explain its behavior. But the data resisted interpretation, forming shapes that looked meaningful from a distance but dissolved under close examination. I began to suspect that the case was solving me rather than the reverse. Each visit to the room peeled away another layer of certainty, another assumption about how investigation works, how reality functions, how memory preserves and distorts experience. I was becoming evidence in my own investigation, a witness to my own dissolution. The photograph on the mantelpiece moved, not dramatically, just a slight shift in position, as if someone had bumped the furniture. But I was the only person in the room, and I hadn't touched anything. I stared at the silver frame, still face down, still hiding whatever image it contained. The urge to turn it over grew stronger with each visit, but so did my conviction that doing so would fundamentally alter something I wasn't prepared to change. Page 23 of my notebook contained a drawing I didn't remember making. Simple lines forming a rough map or diagram rectangles connected by corridors. With one room marked by an X, it looked like a floor plan, though not of any building I recognized. The paper was creased as if it had been folded and unfolded many times, though I always kept the notebook flat in my jacket pocket. The woman's voice returned, but not through telephone calls. I heard it in the room sometimes, faint and directionless, as if emerging from the walls themselves. She was telling the same story, but backward now, starting with his absence and working toward their last conversation. The chronology felt more natural this way, more honest somehow. He said he would come home, the voice whispered. Then he usually came home. Finally, he always came home. The progression revealed something I had missed before, not the erosion of certainty, but its construction. Memory building itself from fragments, creating coherence through repetition, through the gradual accumulation of details that might or might not have existed. I realized I had been investigating the wrong disappearance. The man was never the mystery. The mystery was the woman, the caller, the voice that had drawn me into this labyrinth of contradictions. She was the one who had vanished, leaving behind only echoes and empty apartments and disconnected phone numbers. But even this revelation felt incomplete, like a solution that created more questions than it answered. If she had never existed, who had I been talking to? If she had existed but disappeared, why could no one else remember her? If she was real but I had imagined our conversations, what did that say about the reliability of my other observations? The curtain moved more violently during my final visit, though violent might be too strong a word. Agitated, perhaps, urgent. The fabric twisted and writhed as if trying to communicate something beyond the capacity of language. I watched for hours, taking notes that became increasingly illegible as my hand cramped and my vision blurred. When I finally left the room, I knew I wouldn't return, not because the case was solved, but because it had evolved beyond the need for solution. It had become something else entirely, a question that was also its own answer, a mystery that was most truthful when it remained mysterious. The notebook now contains 47 pages, though I remember buying a 50-page model. The missing pages might have been torn out, or perhaps they never existed. Memory is unreliable about such details, and I've learned not to trust my recollections absolutely. The coffee stain on page 7 has faded to a pale brown shadow that no longer resembles a bird. I sometimes hear her voice in other contexts now, in crowded restaurants, on busy streets, in the background of television programs. Always just at the edge of audibility, always saying something I can't quite catch. I've stopped trying to locate the source of these sounds. Some investigations are meant to remain perpetually in progress, forever approaching but never reaching their conclusions. The case file sits in my desk drawer, officially closed but spiritually unresolved. I add to it occasionally newspaper clippings that might be relevant, photographs of curtains in other rooms, fragments of overheard conversations that echo themes from my investigation. The file grows thicker but not more comprehensible, like a book written in a language that shifts its meaning with each reading. I understand now that some disappearances are not events but processes, not mysteries to be solved but conditions to be inhabited. The man, the woman, the room, the curtain, they exist in a space between presence and absence, between memory and imagination, between investigation and revelation. The curtain still moves, though I'm no longer there to witness it. This certainty comes not from evidence, but from a deeper knowledge, the kind that develops when you've spent enough time inside a mystery to become part of it. Somewhere in that windowless room, dust motes still dance in impossible light, and fabric still sways to rhythms that exist outside conventional understanding of cause and effect. I carry the case with me now, not in my notebook, but in my perception. Every curtain I see reminds me of that first one. Every unexplained sound echoes the creak of a door that might or might not have moved. Every disconnected phone number suggests the possibility of voices that exist in the spaces between connection and silence. The investigation continues, but its methodology has changed. Instead of seeking answers, I've learned to inhabit questions. Instead of documenting evidence, I've become evidence myself, a witness to the ways mystery can reshape the observer, can transform the act of investigation into a form of self-discovery that reveals more about the searcher than the searched. Story 2. I stood frozen, watching the curtains, expecting them to flutter with the evening breeze. Yet they lay flat, unmoving, as if the air around them was held by an unseen hand. Shadows stretched across the floor, elongating with the dimming light, but revealed no intruder. The room was still, yet my senses prickled with anticipation. I listened intently, waiting for a whisper or a creak, something to justify the silence. In that waiting, the room held its breath, and it was the absence of movement that made my heart quicken. Then I saw it, the edge of the curtain, pinched tightly between the frame and the wall, as if caught by an invisible force. The window frame. The wood around the window showed fresh scratches, thin lines carved into the white paint like fingernails dragged across a surface. I had painted that frame myself not long ago, choosing the color carefully to match the rest of the room. The scratches weren't there before. They formed a pattern, almost deliberate, clustered near the latch mechanism. When I ran my finger along them, tiny flakes of paint came away, revealing the dark wood beneath. The scratches felt rough under my touch, recent enough that no dust had settled into their grooves. The carpet beneath. Small fragments of that same white paint dotted the carpet below the window. They created a scattered trail, like breadcrumbs leading from the window toward the center of the room. I knelt down and picked up one of the larger pieces. It was still slightly soft, not completely dried. The paint matched exactly what I had used, but I couldn't remember dropping any during my careful work. The fragment seemed to have fallen from above, settling into the carpet fibers in a way that suggested recent disturbance. The silence asterisk. The absence of sound felt heavier than noise would have. No traffic hummed from the street outside, no neighbors moved about in adjacent rooms, no appliances cycled on or off. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, absorbed by the walls and furniture around me. This silence had weight pressing against my eardrums like being underwater. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, that would break the oppressive quiet. The harder I listened, the more the silence seemed to push back, creating a ringing in my ears that might have been real or imagined. The chair by the desk. It sat at an angle I didn't recognize, turned slightly away from the desk toward the window. The leather seat bore an impression, a depression that suggested recent occupation. I always pushed this chair fully under the desk when I finished working, a habit ingrained over years of maintaining order in my space. The impression in the leather was deeper than what my own weight would create, and wider too. When I pressed my hand into the seat, it felt warm, though the room itself was cool. The desk drawer. The second drawer from the top sat slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness within. I kept important papers there, documents I rarely accessed but needed to preserve. My hands trembled as I pulled the drawer open fully. Everything appeared to be in place, the folders arranged in the same careful order I maintained. But the folder tabs showed smudges, fingerprint marks that weren't there before. Someone had been through these papers, handling them with enough care to replace them precisely, but not enough to avoid leaving traces. The photograph asterisk. Among the papers sat a photograph I didn't remember placing there. It showed a room that looked remarkably similar to the one I stood in, but with subtle differences. The furniture was arranged differently, the curtains hung in another pattern, the carpet showed a different wear pattern. In the photograph, the chair by the desk sat at the same unusual angle I had just noticed in my own room. The photograph had no date, no identifying marks, just an image that felt like looking into a distorted mirror. The door handle. Behind me, the door handle gleamed with fresh polish, though I hadn't cleaned it recently. The brass surface reflected the room's dim light, but it also showed smudges and marks that suggested repeated handling. The lock mechanism looked different somehow, though I couldn't identify exactly what had changed. When I turned the handle, it moved with a smoothness that seemed new, as if the internal mechanisms had been recently oiled or adjusted. The floorboard. Near the door, one of the floorboards sat slightly higher than its neighbors, creating a small ridge that hadn't been there before. When I stepped on it, it gave slightly under my weight and produced a soft creaking sound. The nails holding it in place looked disturbed, their heads sitting just above the wood surface instead of flush as they should be. Something had been beneath this board, something that required access from above. The light switch. The wall switch felt different under my fingers, the plastic surface rougher than I remembered. Tiny scratches surrounded the switch plate, marks that could have been made by tools working in dim light. The screws holding the plate to the wall were slightly loose, allowing the entire fixture to shift when I pressed the switch. The light it controlled flickered briefly before steadying, casting wavering shadows across the room. The air itself. Something in the atmosphere had changed, a scent so faint I couldn't identify it directly. It wasn't perfume or cologne, nothing that obvious. Instead, it was the smell of occupation, of someone else's presence lingering in the space. The air felt thicker, as if it had been breathed by lungs other than my own. When I moved through the room, I could sense pockets of air that felt different, cooler or warmer, as if someone had recently passed through them. The mirror. The small mirror on the wall reflected the room behind me, but something in the reflection seemed wrong. The proportions looked different, the angles shifted in ways that didn't match my direct view. When I turned to compare the reflection with reality, everything appeared normal, but when I looked back at the mirror, the distortion returned. The glass itself showed no obvious defects, no warping or cracks that could explain the visual discrepancy. The books on the shelf. Several volumes sat in positions I didn't recognize, their spines creating gaps where I was certain I had maintained careful order. One book lay flat on top of the others, open to a page I had never read. The text spoke of hidden spaces, of secrets concealed within familiar places. Bookmark ribbons hung from several volumes, marking passages I couldn't remember selecting. The books felt warm to the touch, as if they had been recently handled. The wastebasket asterisk. Empty but lined with a fresh bag I didn't remember installing. The previous bag had contained the usual debris of daily life, tissues and scraps of paper, but now it was gone. The new bag sat perfectly fitted to the basket's contours, its edges tucked with more care than I typically employed. At the bottom of the bag, a single drop of something dark had stained the plastic, creating a small mark that looked deliberate rather than accidental. The temperature asterisk. The room felt warmer than it should have, given the cool evening air outside. My skin detected variations in temperature as I moved about, warm spots and cool zones that created an invisible map of recent activity. Near the window, the air was cooler, suggesting that it had been open recently despite being closed now. By the desk, warmth lingered as if someone had been sitting there for an extended period. The telephone. The handset sat in its cradle, but the cord was twisted in a way that indicated recent use. I rarely used this phone, preferring the convenience of my mobile device, but the cord showed the characteristic spiraling that comes from being stretched and turned during conversation. The redial button, when pressed, produced a series of tones that connected to a number I didn't recognize. The call went unanswered, but the very fact that someone had used my phone created a chill that ran down my spine. The calendar asterisk. On my desk, the calendar showed marks I hadn't made. Small pencil dots appeared next to certain dates, creating a pattern I couldn't decipher. The marks were light, almost invisible unless viewed from the correct angle, but they were definitely there. They seemed to cluster around dates that had significance in my life, appointments and events I had planned but hadn't yet written down. Someone had been tracking my schedule with careful attention to detail. The curtain fabric. Returning to where my observation began, I examined the curtain more closely. The fabric showed signs of handling, wrinkles and creases that suggested it had been moved aside and then carefully repositioned. The hem was slightly damp, as if someone had touched it with wet fingers. When I lifted the curtain to examine the window behind it, I found that the glass was clean on the inside but bore smudges on the exterior surface. Handprints that could only have been made from outside. The lock. The window lock was engaged, but the metal showed scratches around the mechanism that suggested it had been manipulated. These weren't the scratches of normal use, but the precise marks that come from tools designed to defeat such mechanisms. The lock still functioned, turning smoothly in both directions, but its security had been compromised. Someone had gained access and then carefully secured the window again upon leaving. The realization asterisk. Standing in the center of the room, I began to understand that every element I had observed was connected, part of a larger pattern of intrusion and concealment. Someone had been in my space, not as a casual intruder, but as a careful observer, studying my habits and routines with methodical precision. They had touched my belongings, read my papers, used my phone, and marked my calendar. The evidence was subtle but undeniable, a catalog of violation that left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. The final detail. As I prepared to leave the room, I noticed one last element that tied everything together. On the windowsill, barely visible in the dim light, sat a single drop of water. It was perfectly round, too perfect to be natural condensation. As I watched, it began to evaporate, leaving behind a small ring on the painted surface. The drop had been placed there deliberately, a signature left by someone who wanted me to know they had been present. In that moment, I realized that they might still be watching, waiting to see how I would respond to their carefully orchestrated message. The room held its secrets close, but it had revealed enough to change everything I thought I knew about my own safety and privacy. Story 3. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate shadows on the hardwood floor. The air carried the faint aroma of fresh lilacs, mingling oddly with a sharp chemical scent. A breeze slipped through an ajar window, unsettling the dust that clung resolutely to the neglected piano. Everything seemed untouched, yet the chilling draft whispered of an absence that was never meant to be filled. I stood in the doorway, my fingers still wrapped around the brass key she had given me. The metal felt unusually warm against my palm, as if someone else had been holding it moments before. The house breathed around me with the subtle creaks of settling wood, but there was something else beneath those familiar sounds, a rhythm that didn't belong. The chemical smell grew stronger as I moved deeper into the living room. It reminded me of the cleaning solution she used on the bathroom tiles, but sharper, more concentrated. The kind of smell that makes you hold your breath without realizing why. I found myself walking carefully, as if the floorboards might give way beneath my weight, though I had walked across them countless times before. The piano bench sat askew, just enough to catch my attention. She was meticulous about keeping everything in its place. The sheet music remained stacked neatly on top of the instrument, but when I looked closer, the pages were arranged differently than I remembered. The piece on top was something I had never seen her play, something with harsh, angular notes that seemed to cut across the staff. I called her name softly, though I already knew she wouldn't answer. The silence that followed felt deliberate, as if the house itself was choosing not to respond. My voice seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, mixing with the dust motes that danced in the filtered sunlight. The kitchen revealed more inconsistencies. A coffee cup sat on the counter, still bearing the faint brown ring of liquid that had evaporated, but she never drank coffee from that particular cup. It was part of a set she kept for guests, the ones with the delicate blue flowers around the rim. The everyday cups remained in their usual spots in the cabinet, untouched and clean. I opened the refrigerator without thinking, perhaps hoping to find some clue about her routine, her plans. The shelves were organized as always, but there was a container I didn't recognize. Something in a clear plastic tub that looked like it might have been soup, though the color seemed wrong, too pale, almost translucent. When I lifted it to examine it more closely, the contents shifted in a way that made my stomach turn. The phone on the kitchen wall showed no messages, but the receiver felt sticky when I picked it up to check. I found myself wiping my hand on my jeans afterward, though I couldn't identify what had been on the plastic surface. The dial tone hummed steadily in my ear, ordinary and reassuring, until I noticed it seemed to pulse with an irregular rhythm. Upstairs, her bedroom door stood partially open. I had never been invited into that space, and even now, with the key in my possession and her obvious absence, I hesitated at the threshold. The bed was made with military precision, the corners tucked and smooth, but there were impressions in the comforter as if someone had been sitting on the edge, two distinct depressions side by side. The dresser mirror reflected my own uncertain face, but for a moment I thought I saw movement behind me. When I turned, there was nothing but the hallway I had just walked through. The mirror's surface was clean except for a small smudge near the bottom corner, roughly the size of a fingerprint. When I leaned closer to examine it, I realized it was on the back side of the glass, impossible to reach or clean. Her closet contained the expected array of conservative dresses and sensible shoes, but hanging in the very back was something that didn't fit the pattern. A red silk blouse, still bearing tags, expensive enough to represent a significant purchase for someone on her budget. The fabric felt impossibly smooth between my fingers, and when I held it up to the light, I could see it had never been worn. I found myself drawn back to the living room, to the piano that dominated the space. The keys were yellowed with age, some more than others, creating a map of the melodies she played most often. But when I pressed middle C, the note that rang out seemed wrong, slightly flat or sharp in a way that made my teeth ache. I tried the adjacent keys, and they too produced sounds that felt discordant, as if the instrument had been deliberately retuned. The sheet music on top contained penciled notations in a handwriting I didn't recognize. The script was angular and hurried, unlike her careful, rounded letters. Some of the notes had been circled, others crossed out entirely. At the bottom of the page, someone had written a single word that I couldn't decipher, the letters blurred as if they had been written while the pencil was moving too quickly. The chemical smell seemed to be coming from beneath the piano. I knelt on the hardwood floor and peered into the shadows under the instrument. There was something there, pushed far back against the wall. A small bottle, the kind that might contain medicine or cleaning solution. When I reached for it, my fingers came away damp, though I couldn't tell if it was from the bottle itself or from moisture that had collected on the floor. The bottle was unmarked, containing a clear liquid that could have been anything. Water, vodka, some kind of solvent. When I unscrewed the cap, the chemical smell intensified, making my eyes water. I replaced the cap quickly and set the bottle on the piano bench, where it seemed to catch the light in an unsettling way. I tried to remember the last conversation we had shared. She had been standing by the kitchen window, looking out at the garden where the lilacs were just beginning to bloom. She mentioned something about expecting a visitor, someone she hadn't seen in a long time. When I asked who, she had smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and changed the subject. The garden was visible from where I now stood in the living room. The lilac bushes were indeed in full bloom, their purple clusters heavy with morning dew. But there were footprints in the soft earth beneath the window, impressions that looked fresh despite the fact that she was supposed to have been gone for several days. The prints were larger than her feet, and they seemed to lead from the flower bed toward the back of the property, where a line of trees blocked my view. I found myself checking the locks on all the doors, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, and the back door was secured from the inside. All the windows were locked except for the one in the living room, the one that had been letting in the breeze that disturbed the dust on the piano. When I examined the window more closely, I noticed that the screen was missing, not damaged or torn, simply absent. The basement door was locked, but the key hung on its usual hook beside the refrigerator. I had never been down there, and she had never offered to show me the space. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the cool darkness. The air smelled different down here, mustier but also tinged with that same chemical scent that permeated the rest of the house. The basement was larger than I had expected, extending under what must have been the entire footprint of the house. Shelves lined the walls, filled with the usual accumulation of a long life. Holiday decorations, old books, boxes labeled in her careful handwriting. But in the far corner there was a newer addition. A desk that looked out of place among the stored memories, and on it a telephone that was definitely not an extension of the upstairs line. The phone was an older model, the kind with a rotary dial, but it had been modified in some way. Additional wires ran from the base to a small recording device that sat beside it. When I pressed the play button, the machine whirred to life, producing a conversation that made my hands shake. Her voice was unmistakable, but she was speaking to someone in a tone I had never heard her use. Cold, calculating, discussing arrangements that involved money and timing and consequences. The other voice was harder to identify, distorted by the poor quality of the recording, but there was something familiar about the cadence, the way certain words were emphasized. I rewound the tape and played it again, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The conversation seemed to be about a transaction of some kind, though the specifics were couched in language that could have meant anything. References to the package and the delivery, and making sure there were no complications. The recording ended abruptly, as if someone had disconnected the call without warning. The desk drawers were locked, but the keys were in the top center drawer, as if she hadn't been concerned about anyone finding them. Inside, I discovered a collection of documents that painted a picture I couldn't reconcile with the woman I thought I knew. Bank statements showing large deposits and withdrawals, correspondence with people whose names meant nothing to me, and photographs of places I had never seen her visit. One photograph in particular caught my attention. It showed her standing beside a car I didn't recognize, but she wasn't alone. There was someone else in the frame, though their face had been carefully scratched out with what looked like a pen or pencil. The scratches were so deep they had torn through the paper in places, suggesting whoever had defaced the image had been driven by strong emotion. I climbed back upstairs with more questions than answers, the recording device tucked under my arm. The house felt different now, as if my presence in the basement had somehow altered its fundamental nature. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. Even the lilac scent from the garden seemed cloying, almost artificial. The coffee cup in the kitchen had been moved. I was certain I had left it beside the sink, but now it sat in the center of the table, positioned as if someone had been using it recently. When I touched the ceramic surface, it was still warm. I called the police from the upstairs phone, though I wasn't sure what to report. A missing person, perhaps, though I had no proof that anything had happened to her. Suspicious circumstances, though I couldn't articulate what made them suspicious. The officer who took my call was polite but skeptical, asking questions I couldn't answer satisfactorily. While I waited for them to arrive, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to piece together a timeline that made sense. The last time I had seen her, she had given me the key and asked me to check on the house while she was away. She said she would be visiting relatives, though she had never mentioned having family before. She said she would be gone for a week, maybe longer, depending on circumstances she didn't specify. That had been 4 days ago, though now I found myself questioning even that basic fact. Had it been 4 days or longer, the memory felt slippery, as if trying to hold on to water. I remembered the conversation, but the details kept shifting when I tried to focus on them. The police arrived as the afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows at a different angle. 2 officers, both younger than I had expected, both wearing expressions that suggested they had already decided this was a waste of their time. They walked through the house with professional efficiency, noting the same inconsistencies I had observed but drawing different conclusions. The chemical smell they suggested was probably just cleaning solution. The displaced objects could be explained by her preparations for travel. The recording equipment in the basement was unusual but not necessarily sinister. People recorded phone conversations for all sorts of reasons. The missing screen from the living room window had probably been removed for cleaning and not yet replaced. Their explanations were reasonable, logical, grounded in the kind of practical experience that comes from investigating dozens of similar calls. But they didn't account for the feeling that had settled in my chest like a cold stone, the certainty that something fundamental had been disturbed in this house. After they left, I found myself reluctant to leave as well. The key felt heavier in my pocket, weighted with responsibilities I hadn't anticipated when I accepted it. I walked through the rooms once more, trying to see them through the officer's eyes, trying to convince myself that their rational explanations were sufficient. But the house continued to whisper its secrets in ways that couldn't be documented or reported. The way the floorboards creaked in patterns that suggested footsteps when no one was walking. The way the air moved through rooms in currents that defied the placement of doors and windows. The way shadows fell in configurations that seemed to spell out messages I couldn't quite read. As evening approached, I finally locked the front door behind me and walked to my car. But before I drove away, I looked back at the house one more time. In the upstairs window, the one that belonged to her bedroom, I thought I saw a figure standing behind the curtains. Just for a moment, just long enough to make me question what I had actually seen. I drove home through streets that seemed unfamiliar, though I had traveled the same route countless times. The recording device sat on the passenger seat beside me, its presence both accusatory and protective. I knew I should turn it over to the police, add it to their file of reasonable explanations and logical conclusions. But I also knew that some questions can't be answered by evidence and procedure. Some mysteries resist solution not because the truth is hidden, but because the truth itself is more complex than any single explanation can contain. The morning sun had filtered through those lace curtains onto a scene that looked peaceful and undisturbed, but appearances, I was learning, could be more deceptive than any deliberate lie. The chemical scent still lingered in my nostrils as I pulled into my own driveway, and I wondered if it would ever fully fade, or if it would remain as a permanent reminder of the morning when everything I thought I knew proved to be insufficient for understanding what I had actually found. Story 4. I had just wiped away the smudge from the window. The fabric felt thin between the pane and my fingertip, a boundary as fragile as the silence that followed. In the room, the air was dense, clinging to my skin like a second layer. A creak from the floorboards beneath shifted my balance ever so slightly, but nothing moved. My breath caught, the rhythm interrupted. The pulse in my ears grew louder, an unfamiliar companion in the too-still room. Something didn't feel steady anymore. The cloth in my hand was damp. I don't remember making it damp. Water leaves traces, and traces leave questions. I folded it carefully, the way someone taught me once, corners meeting corners in perfect alignment. The motion felt automatic, muscle memory from a time I can't quite place. She used to fold things that way. Her hands moved with precision, never hurried, never careless. I watched her once through this same window, standing in the garden with laundry that caught the wind like white flags of surrender. The image stays with me, though I'm not sure why it matters now. The house remembers things differently than I do. It holds sounds in its walls, conversations that echo when the temperature drops just enough to make the wood contract. I've learned to listen for these moments when the structure reveals its secrets in small, almost imperceptible shifts. There's a stain on the carpet near the doorway, rust-colored, about the size of a dinner plate. I've scrubbed it twice, maybe 3 times, but it refuses to disappear completely. The fibers have absorbed something permanent, something that changes the texture when you run your fingers across it. I avoid walking on that spot now. The phone rang yesterday, or perhaps it was the day before. Time moves strangely in this house. The caller hung up before I could answer, but I heard breathing on the other end, shallow and deliberate. It reminded me of how she used to breathe when she was thinking, weighing her words before speaking. I found a note tucked inside a book on the shelf. The handwriting looked familiar, though I couldn't place it immediately. The message was simple: check the basement. I don't remember writing it, but my pen was on the table nearby, cap removed, ink still wet. The basement door sticks when you try to open it. The wood has swollen from moisture, creating a seal that requires force to break. I've been putting off the repair, telling myself it's not urgent. But sometimes I hear sounds from below, like footsteps on concrete, measured and patient. She mentioned the basement once in passing during one of our conversations. Something about storage, about keeping things safe from the weather. Her voice carried an odd weight when she said it, as if the words meant more than their surface suggested. I should have asked what she meant. The neighbors have been watching. I see them through their kitchen window, faces turned toward this house with expressions I can't quite read. They wave when they catch me looking, but their smiles seem forced, practiced. One of them brought cookies last week, standing on the porch with nervous energy, eyes darting past me into the hallway. The cookies tasted wrong, too sweet, with an aftertaste that lingered for hours. I threw them away that night, but I kept the plate. It sits on the counter now, empty and somehow accusatory. I've been having the same dream repeatedly. I'm standing in the garden, looking back at the house. All the windows are dark except one, where a figure stands silhouetted against yellow light. The figure waves, a slow, deliberate gesture, but I can never make out the face. When I wake, my clothes are damp with perspiration, and the taste of earth fills my mouth. The police came by earlier this week. 2 officers, one young and eager, the other older with tired eyes. They asked routine questions about the neighborhood, about whether I'd noticed anything unusual. I offered them coffee, but they declined. The older one kept looking at the stain on the carpet, his gaze returning to it even as we talked about other things. I told them about the phone calls, the breathing on the other end. They wrote it down in a small notebook, but I could see they weren't particularly concerned. Wrong numbers happen all the time, they said. Technology creates ghosts in the system, voices that reach across distances without meaning to. But I know the difference between a wrong number and something else. There's intention in that breathing, recognition. Someone knows I'm here, knows I'm listening. The basement key was in her jewelry box. I found it wrapped in tissue paper, hidden beneath a tangle of necklaces and earrings. The metal was cold against my palm, heavier than it looked. I held it for a long time before deciding what to do with it. When I finally went downstairs, the air smelled different, damp earth and something else, something organic and slightly sweet. The concrete floor was clean, but there were marks along the walls, scratches that looked deliberate, purposeful. Someone had been down there recently. I found boxes stacked in the corner, labeled in that same familiar handwriting. Personal items, photographs, documents, things that belonged to someone who was no longer here to claim them. I opened one box and immediately closed it again. Some discoveries require preparation, mental fortification. The photographs showed places I recognized but couldn't quite place. A park bench beside a pond, a street corner with a distinctive lamppost, a coffee shop with checkered tiles. These were locations from a life I'd observed but never fully participated in, moments captured by someone who paid attention to details. There was a receipt tucked between the photographs, a hardware store purchase, rope, plastic sheeting, cleaning supplies. The date was recent enough to matter, but old enough to have been forgotten by most people. I stared at it until the numbers blurred together. The rope is still down there, coiled neatly beside the water heater. It looks unused, but appearances can be deceiving. Rope holds memory in its fibers, stretches and compressions that tell stories to those who know how to read them. I touched it once and immediately pulled my hand away. She was afraid of something in those final weeks. I could see it in the way she moved, constantly checking over her shoulder, double-locking doors that had never needed extra security. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, claimed it was just stress from work, but her laugh sounded hollow, performed. The last time we spoke, she mentioned going away for a while, a trip to clear her head, she said. She'd be in touch when she got settled. That was weeks ago, maybe longer. Time has a way of stretching when you're waiting for contact that never comes. I've been checking her mail just to make sure nothing important gets lost. Bills continue to arrive, advertisements, catalogs for things she'll never order. There's something unsettling about the persistence of commerce, the way the world continues to expect participation from someone who's no longer participating. The garden is overgrown now. Weeds have claimed the spaces where she used to plant flowers, aggressive growth that seems almost vindictive. I should tend to it, maintain what she started, but every time I step outside with tools, I lose momentum. The earth feels different under my feet, less stable. There's a spot near the back fence where the ground has settled unevenly, a depression about 6 feet long, 2 feet wide. I noticed it after the heavy rains last month when the water pooled in strange patterns. The soil there is darker, richer, as if it's been recently disturbed and allowed to resettle. I measured the depression yesterday. The dimensions are precise, deliberate, not the kind of settling that happens naturally over time, but something more intentional. Someone took care to make sure the measurements were exact. The neighbor's dog refuses to walk past that section of the fence. It pulls against its leash, whimpering softly, eyes fixed on something I can't see. Animals sense things we've trained ourselves to ignore, frequencies of wrongness that register below conscious awareness. I've started sleeping poorly, not insomnia exactly, but a restless half-consciousness where dreams and waking thoughts blend together. I find myself standing at windows in the middle of the night, looking out at the garden, searching for movement in the shadows. The phone calls have stopped. The silence is somehow worse than the breathing. At least the calls suggested presence, someone on the other end acknowledging my existence. Now there's just the empty line, the dial tone that stretches into nothing. I went back to the basement yesterday. The boxes had been moved, not dramatically, just shifted slightly, as if someone had been looking through them and tried to replace them exactly. But I have a good memory for spatial relationships, and the angles were wrong. Someone else has a key, someone else knows about the basement, about the boxes, about the things hidden in tissue paper and shadow. The house isn't as secure as I thought, isn't as private as I needed it to be. I found muddy footprints on the basement stairs this morning. They weren't there yesterday, I'm certain of that. The prints are small, narrow, with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel. I've seen that pattern before, pressed into garden soil, marked in the soft earth near the back fence. The police officer's card is still on my refrigerator. the older one with tired eyes who kept looking at the carpet stain. I could call him, report the footprints, the moved boxes, the settled ground in the garden. But what would I say? How would I explain what I know without explaining how I know it? Knowledge has weight. It accumulates in your chest, pressing against your ribs until breathing becomes conscious effort. I carry things now that I didn't choose to carry, information that arrived without invitation and refuses to leave. The fabric in my hand is dry now. The window is clean, transparent, offering an unobstructed view of the garden where the ground has settled in such precise dimensions. I fold the cloth carefully, corners meeting corners, muscle memory guiding the motion. In the distance, a dog barks once and falls silent. Story 5. It wasn't the first time the curtains were drawn at midday. The sun filtered through the gaps, casting patterns that looked like puzzle pieces scattered across the floor, not quite fitting together. I let the phone ring until it stopped, its silence making the ticking of the wall clock more pronounced. The newspapers stacked on the table seemed heavier than usual, their headlines unread and untouched. I noticed the front door was slightly ajar when it should have been closed, but I settled into the armchair instead, feeling the weight of the cushions press back. When I stood up, the door clicked shut on its own. The nausea started then, or maybe it had been there all along, coiled in my stomach like something waiting. My hands felt cold despite the warmth seeping through the fabric. There's a particular quality to guilt that makes your skin feel too tight, as if you're wearing someone else's body. I've been carrying this sensation for days now, or perhaps weeks. Time has become elastic, stretching and contracting without my permission. The woman's face keeps surfacing in my thoughts, though I can't place exactly where I saw her. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened, like a bird trying to catch a distant sound. Her earrings caught the light, small silver things that trembled when she moved. I remember thinking they looked fragile, the kind of delicate objects that break if you hold them too tightly. But that memory feels borrowed, as if I'm watching someone else's home movies. The colors are too saturated, the edges too sharp. Real memories blur at the margins, don't they? They fade like watercolors left in the rain. I found myself in the kitchen without remembering the walk there. The coffee maker was still warm, though I couldn't recall making coffee. Steam rose from the mug on the counter, forming shapes that dissolved before I could interpret them. The newspaper lay open to a page. I didn't remember turning to something about a missing person, a photograph that seemed familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. The phone had been ringing more frequently. Each time I let it go to the machine, but when I checked later, there were no messages, just the mechanical click of someone hanging up. The sound reminded me of something, a connection I couldn't quite grasp, like trying to remember a word that sits just behind your teeth, refusing to emerge. She had been wearing a blue dress. No, that's not right. It was green, the color of deep water, or was it gray? Memory is a liar, reshaping itself each time you touch it. I can see her hands clearly, though long fingers, no wedding ring, a small scar across the knuckle of her index finger. She kept touching that scar when she spoke, a nervous habit that made me want to reach out and still her hand. The basement door stands open now. I don't remember opening it, but these days I don't remember a lot of things. The darkness below seems to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. There's a smell rising from down there, something sweet and cloying that makes me think of flowers left too long in water, funeral flowers. But that's impossible. I haven't been to any funerals lately. The conversation replays in fragments. Her voice had a slight rasp, as if she'd been talking for hours or had just woken up. She asked about the advertisement, the one I'd placed in the paper. What advertisement? I can't recall placing any advertisement. yet I heard myself responding as if I knew exactly what she meant. My voice sounded different on the phone, more confident than I felt. We arranged to meet, that much I remember clearly, though everything else shifts like sand. The location was my suggestion, somewhere quiet, I said, somewhere we could talk without interruption. She agreed too quickly, with an eagerness that should have warned me of something, though I'm not sure what. The armchair still holds the impression of my body, a depression in the fabric that looks like a shallow grave. I avoid sitting there now, preferring to stand by the window where I can watch the street. Cars pass at regular intervals, their occupants hidden behind tinted glass. Sometimes one slows down and I step back from the curtain, my heart hammering against my ribs. Paranoia tastes metallic, like blood or old coins. It coats the inside of your mouth and makes everything else seem flavorless. I've been eating less, sleeping in fragments. Dreams bleed into waking hours until I can't distinguish between what happened and what I feared might happen. The woman arrived exactly on time. I watched her walk up the front path, noting how she moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the concrete in a steady rhythm. She paused at the door, checking her reflection in the glass panel, smoothing her hair with those long fingers. When she knocked, the sound seemed to echo through the house longer than it should have. I opened the door before the echoes faded. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was something calculating in her expression, as if she were measuring me against some internal standard. We shook hands. Hers was warm, mine felt like ice. She commented on the house, how quiet the neighborhood seemed, how private. The way she said private made my skin crawl. But did we shake hands? The memory feels rehearsed, like a scene from a play I've watched too many times. Maybe we didn't touch at all. Maybe she stepped inside without invitation, moving through my space as if she owned it. Memory lies, reshapes, betrays. I can't trust what I think I remember. The basement door calls to me now with increasing frequency. Each time I pass it, I feel drawn to look down into that breathing darkness. The sweet smell has grown stronger, or maybe my senses have become more acute. Guilt sharpens everything, colors become more vivid, sounds more penetrating, smells more distinct. It's as if my body is trying to compensate for the numbness in my mind. We talked for what felt like hours. She sat in the armchair, the one that now holds phantom impressions, and I remained standing by the window. She asked questions I can't quite remember, and I gave answers that seemed to satisfy her. The conversation had a dreamlike quality, words floating between us without quite landing. I remember watching her mouth move and thinking how small her teeth were, like a child's teeth in an adult's face. The phone rang during our conversation. I let it ring just as I always do, but she looked startled by the sound. Her hand flew to her throat, fingers wrapping around something I couldn't see, a necklace perhaps, or just her own pulse. When the ringing stopped, she laughed, but the sound was hollow, forced. That's when I noticed the way she kept glancing toward the basement door, not directly, but in quick, furtive looks when she thought I wasn't watching, as if she knew something was down there, something I'd forgotten or chosen not to remember. Her nervousness was contagious, seeping into my skin like cold water. The newspapers on the table seem to multiply when I'm not looking. Each morning there are more of them, their headlines blurring together into a chorus of tragedy and loss. Missing persons, unsolved cases, families searching for answers they may never find. I don't remember subscribing to so many papers, yet they keep arriving, piling up like accusations. She stood up suddenly, smoothing down her dress with those nervous hands. The movement was abrupt, as if she'd heard something I couldn't perceive. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in details with the intensity of someone memorizing a crime scene. When she looked at me, I saw something I hadn't noticed before: fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from surprise, but the deep, bone-cold fear of recognition. Did she know something I didn't, or did she know something I was trying to forget? The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. She gathered her purse, checked her phone, made excuses about another appointment, but her movements were too quick, too rehearsed. She was fleeing, though from what I couldn't say. I walked her to the door, our footsteps echoing differently now, as if the house had changed shape around us. At the threshold, she turned back. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to say something important, something that might explain the tension crackling between us like static electricity. But no words came. Instead, she touched that scar on her knuckle again, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache with recognition I couldn't place. Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the path in the same steady rhythm, but faster now, urgent. I stood in the doorway watching until she disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the geometry of suburban streets. The silence that followed felt different from before, heavier, more expectant. The basement door was open when I turned around. I was certain I'd closed it before she arrived, but certainty has become a luxury I can no longer afford. The darkness below seemed deeper, more welcoming. The sweet smell rose up like an invitation, mixing with the lingering traces of her perfume, something floral and cloying that reminded me of funeral homes. I descended the stairs without deciding to, my feet finding each step as if they remembered the way. The basement was exactly as I'd left it, though I couldn't recall being down there recently. Boxes lined the walls, their contents forgotten. A workbench stood against the far wall, tools arranged with obsessive precision. Everything in its place, everything exactly where it should be. Except for the disturbed earth in the corner. The dirt looked freshly turned, darker than the surrounding concrete floor. Had there always been a patch of exposed earth down there? The house was old, its foundation uncertain. Settling, probably. Houses settle. Ground shifts. Nothing unusual about that. But the smell was stronger here, sweet and thick enough to taste. I found myself breathing through my mouth, trying to avoid the cloying sensation coating my sinuses. Flowers, definitely flowers. Someone must have spilled fertilizer, or maybe there was a leak in the water pipes. Old houses have problems like that. The woman's face haunts me now with increasing clarity, as if distance has sharpened the focus of memory. Those small teeth, the nervous habit of touching her scar, the way she kept glancing toward the basement door. She knew something, or suspected something. The fear in her eyes wasn't random, it was specific, targeted, personal. I've been avoiding the basement since that visit, but the door keeps opening on its own. Old hinges, probably. The house settling on its foundation, shifting in ways that affect the doors and windows. Nothing supernatural about it. Nothing to suggest guilt or consequence or the weight of actions I can't quite remember taking. The phone calls have stopped. The sudden silence is more unsettling than the ringing ever was. I find myself listening for sounds that don't come, waiting for interruptions that never arrive. The quiet feels accusatory, as if the world is holding its breath, waiting for me to confess something I'm not sure I've done. Sleep comes in fragments now, broken by dreams that feel more real than waking. In these dreams, I'm always digging. The shovel feels familiar in my hands, its weight perfectly balanced. The earth gives way easily, as if it wants to be disturbed. Sometimes I'm filling a hole rather than digging one, smoothing the surface until it looks undisturbed, natural. But these are just dreams. Anxiety manifests in strange ways, creating scenarios that feel real but exist only in the landscape of a guilty conscience. Guilt without crime, fear without cause. The mind plays tricks when it's under stress, manufacturing memories to explain emotions that have no rational source. The newspapers keep arriving, their headlines growing more specific, more pointed. A woman reported missing, last seen in this neighborhood, driving a blue car, or maybe it was green, wearing a dress the color of deep water, silver earrings that caught the light, a scar on her knuckle from a childhood accident. But newspapers can't be trusted either. Print blurs, headlines shift when you're not looking directly at them. Words rearrange themselves to match your fears rather than reporting facts. I should stop reading them, stop letting their manufactured urgency seep into my consciousness like poison. The basement door stands open again. This time I don't fight the pull toward the darkness below. The stairs creak under my weight, a familiar song I don't remember learning. The sweet smell envelops me like an embrace, cloying and intimate. The disturbed earth in the corner has settled, looking more natural now, as if it's always been that way. Tools hang on the wall in perfect order. A shovel, clean and bright, as if recently used and carefully maintained. Garden implements that suggest care, cultivation, the patient tending of growing things. Nothing sinister about gardening tools. Nothing that suggests anything other than suburban normalcy. But the smell persists, sweet and thick and wrong. Flowers don't smell like this when they're growing. Only when they're dying, when they're cut and contained and slowly rotting in stagnant water. The smell of funeral arrangements left too long in closed rooms, of good intentions gone bad. I stand in the basement, breathing through my mouth, trying to make sense of fragments that refuse to coalesce into a coherent narrative. The woman with the nervous hands and calculating eyes. The conversation that felt rehearsed and hollow, the fear in her expression when she looked at me, recognition mixed with terror. Did I know her before she came to the house? Had we met somewhere else under different circumstances? The familiarity I felt when she touched her scar suggests a history I can't access, memories locked behind doors I'm afraid to open. The earth in the corner draws my attention like a magnet, such a small patch of disturbed ground, really, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The kind of thing that could be explained away easily, a leak, a repair, the natural settling of an old foundation. Nothing that would raise questions or attract unwanted attention. Above me, the house creaks and settles, wood expanding and contracting in the rhythm of a structure at rest. But the sounds feel different now, more purposeful, as if the house is trying to tell me something I'm not ready to hear. Old houses hold secrets in their bones, memories absorbed into the walls and floors and foundations. I climb the stairs slowly, each step taking effort, as if I'm moving through water or thick air. The basement door closes behind me with a soft click, sealing away the sweet smell and the questions it raises. But sealing things away doesn't make them disappear. It only changes where they live, moving them from the external world into the darker spaces of consciousness. The armchair still holds the impression of her body, a shallow depression that refuses to fade. I avoid looking at it directly, but I can feel its presence like a wound in the room's geometry. Sometimes I think I catch a whiff of her perfume, that floral scent that reminded me of funeral homes and endings. The woman had asked about the advertisement, but I still can't remember placing one. What was I advertising? What was I offering that would bring a stranger to my door with fear in her eyes and questions on her lips? The conversation replays in fragments, words without context, responses without questions. Memory is unreliable, reshaping itself each time it's accessed. But some things feel too specific to be manufactured, the way she tilted her head when listening, the small teeth, the nervous habit of touching her scar. These details feel earned, observed, real in a way that contradicts the dreamlike quality of everything else. The phone sits silent on its cradle, no longer demanding attention. The newspapers accumulate on the table, their headlines growing more urgent and specific with each passing day. A search is underway. Volunteers are combing the area. Family members are offering rewards for information. But information about what? And why do I feel implicated in a story I can't remember joining? The basement door calls to me with increasing insistence. Each time I pass it, I feel the pull of that sweet-smelling darkness below. The disturbed earth waits patiently, holding its secrets with the stolid reliability of good soil. Earth doesn't judge or question. It simply accepts what it's given and transforms it into something else, something useful. I find myself standing at the top of the basement stairs more frequently, breathing in that cloying sweetness and trying to make sense of the fragments floating in my consciousness. The woman's face grows clearer with each visit, as if proximity to that disturbed earth sharpens the focus of memory. She had been afraid but not surprised. Her fear was specific, informed, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're walking into. She had come to my house not as a stranger responding to an advertisement, but as someone following a trail that led inevitably to my door. The conversation hadn't been random. Her questions had been pointed, designed to elicit specific responses. She had been testing me, measuring my reactions against some internal standard. When she looked toward the basement door, it wasn't idle curiosity. She knew something was down there. But what did she know, and how did she know it? The tools in the basement hang in perfect order, each one clean and properly maintained. The shovel gleams as if recently polished, its blade showing no trace of use. But cleanliness can be suspicious too, suggesting effort to remove evidence rather than simple tidiness. I don't remember cleaning the shovel, but I don't remember using it either. Memory has become unreliable, full of gaps and inconsistencies that make me question everything I think I know about recent events. The woman's visit feels both distant and immediate, like something that happened years ago and yesterday simultaneously. The sweet smell from the basement has begun to permeate the entire house, seeping through floorboards and rising through heating vents. It's subtle, easily dismissed as imagination or the natural odors of an old house, but it's persistent, growing stronger rather than fading, as if its source is becoming more concentrated. Flowers decompose quickly when cut from their roots. They begin dying the moment they're severed, their beauty becoming more fragile and temporary with each passing hour. Eventually, sweetness turns to rot, beauty to decay, life to something else entirely. The woman's perfume had that same quality, beauty on the edge of corruption, sweetness that hinted at endings. When she stood to leave, the scent lingered in the air like a ghost, mixing with the smell rising from the basement until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I stand at the window now, watching the street with increasing vigilance. Cars pass at regular intervals, but some move more slowly than others, their occupants hidden behind tinted glass. Police cars, perhaps, or family members searching for answers that might be buried in the disturbed earth below my feet. The newspapers report progress in the investigation. Witnesses are coming forward. A timeline is being established. The woman's movements on her last known day are being traced with methodical precision. Each headline brings the search closer to my door, like a noose tightening incrementally. But I haven't done anything wrong. I can't remember doing anything wrong. The gaps in my memory are troubling, but they don't necessarily indicate guilt. Stress can cause memory problems. Anxiety can create false narratives. The mind protects itself by forgetting things too painful to remember. The basement door stands open again, revealing that patient darkness below. The sweet smell rises like an invitation, mixing with dust motes and the filtered sunlight from the curtained windows. Everything in the house feels connected now, part of a single narrative I'm afraid to read. I descend the stairs one more time, drawn by the need to understand what my conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. The disturbed earth in the corner looks different now, more settled, more natural, as if it's always been that way. The tools hang in perfect order, clean and bright and innocent. But innocence can be performed just like guilt can be hidden. The shovel's gleaming blade reflects my face in distorted fragments, showing me pieces of myself I don't recognize. The man in the reflection looks capable of things I can't imagine doing, yet something in his eyes suggests he's already done them. The sweet smell is overwhelming down here, thick enough to taste. It coats the inside of my mouth and nose, seeping into my lungs with each breath. Flowers and earth and something else, something organic and inevitable. The smell of transformation, of one thing becoming another. I kneel by the disturbed earth, my hands trembling as they approach the dark soil. It feels warm to the touch, warmer than it should be. Earth this deep should be cool, insulated from the sun's heat by layers of foundation and flooring. But this soil pulses with its own warmth, as if something beneath it is still generating heat. The woman's face floats in my consciousness with perfect clarity now. Every detail sharp and undeniable, the small teeth, the nervous hands, the silver earrings that caught the light. The fear in her eyes when she recognized something in my expression, some truth I was hiding even from myself. She had come to my house knowing she might not leave. The advertisement she mentioned, did I place it, or did she invent it as an excuse to make contact? Either way, she had walked up my front path with the deliberate step of someone approaching an inevitable conclusion. The conversation had been a dance around truths neither of us wanted to speak directly. She knew why she was there, and some part of me knew too, even if my conscious mind refused to acknowledge it. We had played our roles with the stilted precision of actors in a play neither of us had rehearsed. When she stood to leave, the fear in her eyes had crystallized into certainty. She knew she wouldn't make it to her car, wouldn't drive away to safety, wouldn't report back to whoever had sent her. The knowledge sat between us like a third presence, unspoken but understood. My hands sink into the warm earth, feeling for boundaries, for the edges of whatever lies beneath. The soil gives way easily, as if it wants to reveal its secrets. But some secrets are better left buried, some truths too heavy for consciousness to bear. The sweet smell grows stronger as I dig, no longer subtle or deniable. It rises from the earth like breath, warm and organic and final. The smell of endings, of transformations that can't be reversed, of choices that reshape everything that comes after. Above me, the house settles into evening quiet, its rooms filling with shadows that seem deeper than they should be. The curtains filter the last light of day, casting those puzzle piece patterns across floors that know more than they're telling. The phone sits silent, no longer demanding answers I can't give. The newspapers will continue their reports, their headlines growing more urgent as the search intensifies. But searches can only find what's meant to be found, and some things are buried too deep for casual discovery. The earth is patient, accepting what it's given and transforming it into something else, something useful. My hands work in the dark soil, following instincts I don't remember developing. The woman's face watches from memory, no longer afraid but somehow peaceful, as if she's finally gotten the answers she came looking for. Her silver earrings catch light that exists only in the past, trembling with movements that will never be repeated. The basement breathes around me, expanding and contracting like lungs, like something alive and aware. The sweet smell has become part of the air itself, inescapable and intimate. I breathe it in and taste the metallic flavor of choices made and unmade, of lines crossed and boundaries dissolved. The disturbed earth holds its secrets close, but secrets have weight, and weight eventually makes itself known. The house above me creaks with the burden of what it contains, its foundation shifting under the pressure of truths too heavy for normal ground to bear. I sit back on my heels, my hands dark with soil that smells of flowers and endings. The woman's perfume mingles with the earth's sweetness, creating a scent that will linger long after memory fades. Some smells become part of you, absorbed into your skin and breath until you can't tell where they end and you begin. The basement door stands open above me, framing a rectangle of lesser darkness. Beyond it, the house waits with its drawn curtains and silent phone, its accumulating newspapers and phantom impressions. The world continues its patient rotation, carrying secrets in its dark places, transforming everything it touches into something else, something that can be lived with. The earth beneath my hands pulses with warmth that feels almost like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. Some things are better left buried, some stories better left untold. The woman's questions have been answered, her search concluded, her fear transformed into the peaceful certainty of endings. I climb the stairs slowly, leaving the sweet-smelling darkness behind. The basement door closes with a soft click, sealing away what needs to be sealed. Above me, the house settles into its evening rhythms, creaking and breathing like something alive. The armchair no longer holds her impression. The air no longer carries traces of her perfume. The conversation we had exists now only in memory, fragmented and uncertain, like something glimpsed through water. The woman with the nervous hands and calculating eyes has become part of the house's history, absorbed into its bones like so many secrets before her. I draw the curtains fully closed and let the phone ring until it stops. The newspapers can wait, their headlines growing cold and irrelevant. Some stories write themselves, and some truths are too heavy for words to carry. The earth knows how to keep secrets, and houses learn to hold their silence. The sweet smell fades gradually, or maybe I simply grow accustomed to it. Either way, it becomes part of the air I breathe, part of the space I inhabit, part of the man I'm becoming. The woman's face grows dimmer in memory, her features softening until she becomes just another ghost in a house full of shadows. Story 6. It smelled like burnt paper, faint yet unmistakable. The aroma hung in the air as I crossed the threshold, a whisper of fire in a place where no flames should exist. I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the cool, unlit lamp by the door, searching for a logical source. Yet nothing appeared out of the ordinary, no smoke, no embers, just the dim glow of a single bulb surrounded by shadows. The scent lingered, drawing me inward, familiar yet unsettling, like an echo from an unread chapter. I followed it further into the room, where a carpet's corner was slightly upturned, revealing nothing but the wooden floor beneath. I hadn't witnessed this scent since that night, the one we all agreed to forget. My stomach contracts, a familiar knot that has been my companion for weeks now. The nausea arrives without warning, washing over me like cold water, and I find myself gripping the doorframe harder than necessary. My knuckles are white against the dark wood, and I wonder when my hands became so pale, so skeletal. The smell grows stronger, or perhaps my mind is amplifying it, the way it amplifies everything these days. There was a woman in a blue coat. She stood at the edge of the parking lot watching. Her hands were buried deep in her pockets, and her breath formed small clouds in the air. I remember thinking how still she was, unnaturally still, like a photograph someone had pasted into the scene. She never moved, not once, even when the sirens started wailing in the distance, even when everyone else began to run. But that was later, or was it earlier? The sequence feels scrambled, like puzzle pieces scattered across a table, some face down, others missing entirely. I close my eyes and try to reconstruct the timeline, but it slips away from me like water through cupped hands. The carpet's corner bothers me more than it should. Such a small detail, yet it pulls at something deep in my chest, a thread connected to memories I've tried to bury. I kneel and smooth it down, but it springs back up defiant. The wooden floor beneath is darker than the rest, stained in a way that suggests permanence. Water damage, I tell myself, nothing more than water damage. My therapist says trauma fragments memory, breaks it into pieces that don't always fit together properly. She uses words like dissociation and cognitive distortion, clinical terms that feel too clean for the mess inside my head. She doesn't understand that some fragments are too sharp to handle, that some pieces cut you when you try to pick them up. The blue coat woman had a dog, a small terrier that kept pulling at its leash, trying to get closer to the building. She held it back with surprising strength for someone so slight, her grip firm on the leather strap. The dog whined, a high-pitched sound that seemed to echo off the concrete walls. Animals know things, don't they? They sense what humans miss or what humans choose to ignore. I'm walking through the room now, though I don't remember deciding to move. My feet carry me forward of their own accord, following the scent trail like a bloodhound. Each step feels deliberate yet disconnected, as if I'm watching myself from above, a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. The floorboards creak beneath my weight, a sound that should be comforting but isn't. There was laughter that night, inappropriate laughter that bubbled up from somewhere dark and twisted. It wasn't mine, I'm certain of that, but it echoed in my ears long after the silence fell. Someone found humor in what happened, and that thought makes my skin crawl even now. Who laughs at a moment like that? What kind of person finds joy in such circumstances? The burnt paper smell intensifies near the window, where heavy curtains block most of the outside light. I part them slightly and peer out at the courtyard below. Empty now, just concrete and a few scattered leaves that dance in the wind. But I can still see the outline of where the crowd gathered, the invisible imprint of bodies pressed together in morbid curiosity. People love disaster, don't they? They're drawn to it like moths to flame, even when they know it might burn them. My reflection in the glass startles me. When did I become so hollow-looking? My cheeks are sunken, my eyes too large for my face. I look like someone recovering from a long illness, though I can't remember being sick. The person staring back at me seems like a stranger, someone I might pass on the street without recognition. The documents were spread across the table in neat piles. Legal papers, insurance forms, statements that needed to be signed. The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have been, and my signature came out shaky and uncertain. The lawyer kept glancing at his watch, impatient to move on to his next appointment. Time is money, after all, and grief doesn't pay the bills. But which documents, what table? The memory shifts and blurs, details changing each time I try to focus on them. Sometimes the papers are white, sometimes yellow. Sometimes there's a coffee stain in the corner, sometimes not. My mind fills in gaps with fabrications, creates details that feel real but can't possibly be accurate. I'm touching the window now, my palm flat against the cool glass. The courtyard below seems to pulse with phantom activity, shadows moving where no shadows should exist. The blue coat woman is there again, or maybe she never left. Her dog has stopped pulling at the leash and sits obediently at her feet, both of them watching the building with the same intense focus. The taste of copper fills my mouth, metallic and sharp, like I've been biting my tongue without realizing it. I run my tongue across my teeth, searching for the source, but find nothing. The taste persists anyway, coating my mouth with its bitter presence. It reminds me of something, though I can't quite place what. There were 3 of us in the room when it happened, or was it 4? The number keeps changing in my memory, faces appearing and disappearing like actors in a badly edited film. We sat in a circle, though the furniture wasn't arranged that way. Someone had moved the chairs, pushed them closer together than they naturally belonged. The intimacy felt forced, artificial. The conversation was about responsibility. Who knew what and when did they know it? Fingers pointed in different directions, voices raised in accusation and denial. I stayed quiet, my hands folded in my lap, watching the others tear each other apart with words. It was easier to observe than participate, safer to remain on the periphery of the storm. My breathing has become shallow, rapid. The burnt paper smell is overwhelming now, filling my lungs with each inhalation. I step back from the window, but the scent follows me, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my skin. It's inside me now, part of me, and I wonder if I'll ever be able to wash it away. The phone rang at an unusual hour, not late enough to be an emergency, but late enough to be strange. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, delivering information in the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. There had been an incident. My presence was requested. Details would be provided upon arrival. I dressed in the dark, pulling on clothes without really seeing them. The drive felt endless, streetlights blurring past like fallen stars. The radio played soft jazz, incongruously peaceful for such a moment. I turned it off and drove in silence, the only sound the rhythmic thump of tires on pavement. The building was surrounded by vehicles when I arrived. Official vehicles with flashing lights that painted everything in alternating red and blue. The blue coat woman was already there, positioned at her observation post, her dog alert and watchful. She nodded at me as I passed, a gesture that felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. Inside, the smell was stronger, not just burnt paper, but something else underneath it. Something organic and wrong that made my stomach lurch. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but it didn't help. The scent had already invaded my sinuses, taken up residence in the deepest parts of my respiratory system. The room looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer together while no one was looking. The furniture was in the wrong places, arranged in patterns that made no sense. Someone had been here before me, rearranging things, preparing the scene for what was to come. Questions were asked, many questions, repeated in different ways as if the repetition might shake loose a different answer. I responded as best I could, but my memory felt unreliable, full of holes and inconsistencies. The questioner took notes in a small notebook, his pen scratching across the paper with mechanical precision. Time moved strangely that night. Minutes stretched into hours, then compressed back into seconds. I lost track of how long I'd been there, how many times the same questions had been asked. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unflattering illumination that made everyone look like suspects. The blue coat woman's dog began barking at some point, sharp, insistent barks that cut through the night air like knife blades. She tried to quiet it, but the animal was agitated, sensing something the humans had missed, or perhaps something the humans were trying to ignore. I'm back at the window now, though I don't remember returning. The courtyard below is empty again, the phantom crowd dispersed back into memory. The blue coat woman is gone too, leaving only the impression of her presence, a shadow burned into my retinas. The carpet corner has lifted again despite my earlier efforts. I stare at it from across the room, this small rebellion against order, this insistence on revealing what lies beneath. The dark stain on the wooden floor seems larger now, spreading like spilled ink across the boards. Documents were signed that night, papers that changed everything, that shifted responsibility from one set of shoulders to another. The pen was still heavy in my hand, but I signed anyway, my name flowing across the page in dark ink. Legal protection, they called it, necessary precautions in an uncertain world. But protection from what? The question haunts me, circles through my thoughts like a vulture waiting for something to die. What were we so afraid of that we needed legal shields? What truth were we trying to bury beneath layers of official documentation? The taste of copper grows stronger. I run my tongue across my lips and taste salt 2 tears. I didn't realize I was crying. When did the crying start? How long have I been standing here, lost in fragmented recollections that may or may not be real? The burnt paper smell is fading now, or perhaps I've grown accustomed to it. Olfactory adaptation, the scientists call it the way our noses stop registering familiar scents after prolonged exposure. But some smells are too important to ignore, too loaded with meaning to simply fade into background noise. I think about the blue coat woman and wonder if she's real or just another fragment of my fractured memory. Did she really stand there watching, or is she a symbol my mind created to represent the weight of observation, the burden of being seen? Her stillness haunts me more than any movement could. The room feels smaller with each passing moment, the walls pressing inward like a slowly closing fist. I need air, need space, need distance from whatever truth is lurking in these shadows, but my feet won't move, rooted to the floor by invisible anchors. There was a moment of choice that night, a fork in the road where different paths diverged into different futures. I can feel the weight of that moment even now, the gravity of decisions made in haste and fear. But which choice did I make? Which path did I choose? The answer slips away every time I reach for it. The carpet corner lifts higher, revealing more of the stained wooden floor beneath. The dark mark spreads across multiple boards, a Rorschach test in wood grain and shadow. I see shapes in it, faces, hands, abstract forms that shift and change depending on the angle of observation. My reflection in the window has changed again. Now I look younger, or perhaps older, it's hard to tell in the uncertain light. The person staring back at me wears an expression I don't recognize, a mixture of guilt and defiance that sits uncomfortably on familiar features. The documents are still out there somewhere, filed away in cabinets and databases, official records of unofficial truths. My signature anchors me to whatever happened that night, binds me to consequences I'm still trying to understand. Legal protection or legal liability, sometimes the difference is just a matter of perspective. The blue coat woman's dog knew something we didn't. Animals are honest in ways humans have forgotten how to be. They don't rationalize or justify or create elaborate explanations for simple truths. They bark when something is wrong, and they keep barking until someone listens. But no one listened that night. We were too busy protecting ourselves, too focused on damage control to pay attention to the warnings all around us. The dog's barks faded into background noise, just another sound in a night full of sounds we chose not to hear. I'm moving toward the carpet now, drawn by the same compulsion that brought me to this room in the first place. Each step feels inevitable, as if I'm following a script written long ago by someone else's hand. The burnt paper smell grows stronger again, or perhaps it never really faded at all. The stained wooden floor tells a story I'm not sure I want to read. Dark wood grain swirls in patterns that suggest movement, struggle, the kind of permanent marking that comes from something more substantial than spilled water. My knees hit the floor as I leaned closer, trying to decipher the message written in wood and shadow. The taste of copper is overwhelming now, filling my mouth with its metallic presence. I touch my lips and my fingers come away clean, no blood to explain the sensation. But the taste persists, a phantom flavor that exists only in the space between memory and reality. There was laughter that night, inappropriate and hollow. It echoes in my ears even now, a sound that belongs to no one and everyone, the kind of nervous release that comes when people don't know how else to respond to the impossible. Someone found humor in horror, and that thought makes my skin crawl with a cold that has nothing to do with temperature. The blue coat woman is back, standing in the courtyard below, or perhaps she never left. Perhaps she's been there all along, a constant observer in a world of shifting perspectives and unreliable narrators. Her dog sits quietly now, no longer pulling at the leash, as if whatever it was trying to warn us about has already come to pass. My hands are shaking as I smooth down the carpet corner one more time. It springs back up immediately, defiant in its small rebellion against order. The dark stain beneath seems to pulse with its own rhythm, a heartbeat in hardwood that matches the frantic tempo of my own pulse. The documents were insurance, they said, protection against future complications. But insurance implies risk, and risk implies something worth protecting against. What did we know that required such elaborate safeguards? What truth were we so desperate to contain? The questions multiply faster than I can answer them, breeding in the dark corners of my consciousness like some invasive species of doubt. Each answer spawns 3 new questions. Each explanation reveals deeper mysteries. Each memory fragments into smaller, sharper pieces that cut when handled. The burnt paper smell has become part of me now, woven into the fabric of my being like a thread that can't be pulled without unraveling the entire garment. I breathe it in and taste ash, the remnants of something that was once whole but has been reduced to its essential elements through fire and time. The room grows darker as clouds pass over whatever light source exists beyond the heavy curtains. Shadows shift and dance, creating movement where none should exist. The carpet corner lifts higher, revealing more of the story written in stained wood, more of the truth I came here to find but am afraid to fully comprehend. My reflection in the window has become a stranger again, someone I might pass on the street without recognition. The face looking back at me wears the expression of someone who has seen too much, understood too little, and carries the weight of both knowledge and ignorance in equal measure. The blue coat woman raises her hand in what might be a wave or might be a warning. Her dog stands alert beside her, ears pricked forward, listening to sounds only animals can hear. They know something I don't, or perhaps they know something I've forgotten, some truth that got lost in the maze of legal documents and official explanations. The taste of copper fades slowly, replaced by something else, something that tastes like regret and smells like burnt paper and feels like the weight of choices made in darkness. I stand slowly, my knees protesting the movement, and take one last look at the stained wooden floor beneath the rebellious carpet corner. The story is there, written in wood grain and shadow, waiting for someone brave enough to read it fully. But bravery has never been my strongest quality, and some truths are too heavy for one person to carry alone. The burnt paper smell lingers as I turn away, following me like a faithful dog that refuses to be left behind. The blue coat woman is gone when I look out the window again, vanished as suddenly as she appeared. Only the impression of her presence remains, a shadow burned into the courtyard concrete, a reminder that some observers never truly leave, they just learn to watch from places we can't see. Story 7. The Unsigned Report. The overhead light was illuminated, casting uniform shadows across the room. The workspace appeared undisturbed, with all materials aligned according to standard protocol. A single chair was positioned directly under the desk, its wheels perfectly parallel to the nearby cabinet. The clock on the wall indicated the shift had ended precisely 6 hours earlier. The computer was powered down, yet the monitor emitted a faint glow, suggesting recent activity. Papers were filed neatly, leaving no documents out of place. The air carried a trace of freshly printed ink. The recycling bin was empty, though the shredder was warm. A report awaited, unsigned and blank. I stood in the doorway, my fingers still wrapped around the cold metal handle. Something felt wrong about the scene before me, though I couldn't immediately identify what. The office belonged to my colleague, the one who hadn't returned my calls for days. The one whose absence had prompted my supervisor to ask me to check on things. The silence pressed against my eardrums as I stepped inside. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the polished floor. The desk lamp was off, but the natural light filtering through the blinds revealed everything in stark detail. I approached the workspace cautiously, noting how every pen was aligned, every folder stacked with military precision. This level of organization was unusual, even for someone known for being meticulous. The computer monitor's faint glow drew my attention. I pressed the power button and waited as the machine hummed to life. The login screen appeared, requesting credentials I didn't possess, but the recent activity indicator showed files had been accessed well after the official end of the previous shift. Someone had been here, working in the darkness. I pulled open the top desk drawer. Inside, beneath a layer of standard office supplies, I found a small digital recorder. The device was warm, recently used. My thumb found the play button almost instinctively. The sound that emerged made my skin crawl, a voice I recognized but distorted somehow, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about irregularities in the evidence processing system. The voice belonged to my missing colleague, but the words described activities I'd never heard discussed in our department. References to case files being altered, timestamps being modified, and evidence being reclassified without proper authorization. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving only the soft hiss of electronic silence. I rewound and listened again, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The voice spoke of pressure from higher levels, of being asked to make certain items disappear from the official record. There were mentions of specific case numbers, ones I vaguely remembered from recent months. High-profile investigations that had suddenly gone quiet, suspects who had been released without explanation. The smell of fresh ink became more pronounced as I moved around the desk. I traced it to a printer in the corner, its paper tray still warm. The machine's memory showed recent print jobs, but no documents were visible anywhere in the office. I checked the recycling bin again, completely empty, but the shredder beside it was indeed warm to the touch. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the filing cabinet. The folders were arranged alphabetically, each label printed in the same precise font, but as I flipped through them, I noticed gaps. Entire sections were missing, leaving only the plastic dividers that had once separated different categories of cases. The missing files corresponded to the case numbers mentioned in the recording. I sat down in the chair, trying to process what I was discovering. The leather was still indented, as if someone had been sitting there recently. The adjustment lever was set to a height different from my colleague's usual preference. Someone else had been using this workspace, someone taller. The phone on the desk began to ring, its shrill tone cutting through the oppressive silence. I stared at it for several rings before reaching for the receiver. The caller ID showed an internal extension, one I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was electronically altered, robotic, and unsettling. It asked what I was doing in the office, how I had gained access, and what I had found. The questions came rapidly, without pause for my responses. When I tried to explain that I was conducting a welfare check, the line went dead. My heart rate increased as I realized someone was monitoring the office, watching my movements. I looked around for security cameras but saw none, yet the caller had known exactly where I was and what I was doing. I needed to leave, but first I had to understand what had happened to my colleague. I returned to the computer, hoping to find some clue in the recently accessed files. The system required a password, but I noticed a small piece of paper tucked under the keyboard. Written in my colleague's handwriting was a series of numbers and letters that looked like a password. I entered the code and gained access to the desktop. The most recent files were all related to evidence management, specifically the transfer and disposal of physical evidence from closed cases. But these weren't ordinary closed cases, they were investigations that had been abruptly terminated, often just before significant breakthroughs. The documents showed a pattern of evidence being removed from storage and destroyed, always following the same authorization process. The authorization signatures were illegible, but they all came from the same administrative level. Someone with significant authority was systematically eliminating evidence from multiple investigations. The cases spanned several months and involved different types of crimes, but they all shared one common element: they had been getting close to implicating someone important. I printed several of the most damning documents, my hands shaking as I fed paper into the machine. The sound of the printer seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet office. As the pages emerged, I could see financial records, transfer orders, and disposal certificates. The evidence destruction had been thorough and systematic. A new sound reached my ears: footsteps in the hallway outside. They were slow and deliberate, moving in my direction. I quickly gathered the printed documents and shut down the computer. The footsteps stopped directly outside the office door. I held my breath, waiting to see if whoever was out there would enter. The door handle turned slowly. I pressed myself against the wall behind the door, clutching the documents against my chest. The footsteps entered the room, moving with the same deliberate pace. I could hear breathing, slow and controlled. The intruder was searching the office, opening drawers and moving papers around. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. I waited until I could no longer hear them in the hallway before emerging from my hiding spot. The office had been subtly disturbed, not enough to be obvious, but enough for me to notice that someone had been looking for something specific. I examined the documents I had managed to print. The pattern was even clearer now. Evidence from major investigations was being systematically destroyed, always following the receipt of certain communications from external sources. The communications were coded, but they appeared to be instructions from someone outside the official chain of command. The digital recorder was no longer in the desk drawer where I had found it. Someone had taken it while I was hiding, but I remembered enough of what I had heard to understand that my colleague had been documenting this evidence destruction scheme. The recording had been their insurance policy, their way of protecting themselves if the situation escalated. I needed to find my colleague, but I also needed to understand who was behind the systematic destruction of evidence. The documents I had printed contained references to external contractors, private companies that specialized in evidence disposal. These companies were being paid substantial amounts to destroy materials that should have been preserved indefinitely. The financial records showed payments to the same contractor over several months, always for the same service: emergency evidence disposal. The amounts were significant, far more than would be justified for routine destruction of expired materials. Someone was paying premium prices to make specific evidence disappear quickly and permanently. I photographed the documents with my phone, creating a backup record of what I had discovered. The images were clear enough to read, but I knew they might not be sufficient as legal evidence. I needed to find the original files, the ones that had been removed from the filing cabinet. The phone rang again, the same internal extension as before. This time I didn't answer. The ringing continued for a full minute before stopping. Immediately afterward, my own phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. It advised me to stop looking into matters that didn't concern me and to forget what I had seen in the office. I realized that my investigation had already attracted dangerous attention. Someone was monitoring my activities and was prepared to take action to protect their operation. My colleague's disappearance was beginning to make more sense. They had discovered the same evidence destruction scheme and had either been silenced or forced to flee. The documents revealed one more crucial detail: the evidence being destroyed wasn't random. All of the cases involved investigations into organized criminal activities, specifically those with connections to legitimate businesses and public officials. Someone was using their position within the evidence management system to protect a network of criminals from prosecution. I gathered everything I had collected and prepared to leave the office, but as I reached for the door handle, I heard voices in the hallway. Two people were discussing the need to secure the office and prevent any further unauthorized access. They mentioned my name specifically, indicating that they knew exactly who had been investigating. I returned to my hiding spot behind the door and waited for the voices to pass. But instead of moving on, the conversation continued right outside the office. The speakers were discussing how to handle the situation, how to contain the damage from my discovery. One voice suggested that I might need to be dealt with the same way my colleague had been handled. The implication was clear: my colleague hadn't simply disappeared voluntarily. They had been removed because of what they had discovered. And now I was in the same position, having uncovered the same evidence destruction scheme. The people behind this operation were prepared to eliminate anyone who threatened their activities. I listened as the voices discussed the logistics of cleaning up the situation. They mentioned specific locations where evidence had been destroyed, facilities that weren't part of the official disposal system. They talked about payments to individuals within the department, people who had been compromised or coerced into cooperation. The conversation revealed the scope of the conspiracy. It wasn't limited to evidence destruction, but included active manipulation of investigations, suppression of witness testimony, and corruption of the judicial process. The network extended far beyond the evidence management system into multiple levels of law enforcement and the court system. Eventually, the voices moved away from the door. I waited several more minutes before attempting to leave. The hallway was empty, but I could feel the weight of surveillance pressing down on me. Every step felt monitored, every movement tracked by unseen observers. I made it to my own office without incident, but I knew that my safety was temporary. The people behind the evidence destruction scheme had demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats. My colleague's fate served as a clear warning of what could happen to me if I continued investigating. But I also knew that I couldn't simply ignore what I had discovered. The systematic destruction of evidence represented a fundamental corruption of the justice system. Criminals were escaping prosecution because someone with access to the evidence storage system was eliminating the proof of their crimes. I secured copies of the documents I had obtained, storing them in multiple locations to ensure they couldn't be easily destroyed. I also began researching the contractors mentioned in the financial records, trying to understand who was paying for the evidence destruction and why. The contractor information led me to a network of shell companies, each one designed to obscure the true source of the payments. The money trail was complex, but it eventually led back to a series of accounts controlled by individuals with connections to the cases whose evidence had been destroyed. I realized that I was uncovering a sophisticated system of criminal protection, one that operated from within the law enforcement system itself. The people responsible had access to sensitive information about ongoing investigations and could act preemptively to eliminate evidence before it could be used in court. My investigation had reached a critical point. I had enough evidence to expose the scheme, but I also understood that doing so would put me in immediate danger. The people behind this operation had already demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats, and my continued investigation would certainly be seen as a threat. The question that haunted me was whether my colleague was still alive somewhere, hiding from the same people who were now targeting me, or whether they had already paid the ultimate price for their discovery of the evidence destruction scheme. The unsigned report on their desk suggested they had been preparing to document everything, but had been stopped before they could complete their work. As I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of systematic corruption, I realized that I faced the same choice my colleague had confronted. I could remain silent and safe, or I could risk everything to expose the truth. The weight of that decision pressed down on me like the oppressive silence that had filled the empty office where my investigation had begun. The documents spread across my desk told a story of justice perverted, of criminals protected by those sworn to uphold the law, but they also raised questions I wasn't sure I was prepared to answer. How deep did the corruption extend? How many people were involved? And most importantly, what had really happened to my colleague? The answers remained elusive, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and intimidation. But I knew that somewhere in the maze of destroyed evidence and altered records lay the truth about a system that had been fundamentally compromised. Whether I would survive long enough to expose that truth remained an open question, one that would be answered by forces I was only beginning to understand. Story 8. It smelled like lavender, the kind that clung to dusty linens in unopened closets. I stood in the kitchen, the flickering bulb above casting a weak, uneven glow. The scent was stronger than before, lingering when it shouldn't. I glanced at the sink, dry as a bone, with a drip that belonged to another time. The air felt denser as I moved toward the source, the scent morphing into a memory I couldn't quite piece together. The wallpaper seemed to peel back, as if revealing secrets it had absorbed over the years. An involuntary shiver ran through me, whispering of places I'd long since left behind. I shouldn't have recognized it, but I did. The house had been empty when I arrived, at least that's what I kept telling myself. The front door was unlocked, which struck me as odd for a property that had been sitting vacant. The real estate agent had mentioned something about the previous owner, but her words seemed to drift away before I could hold on to them. Something about a woman who lived here alone, who kept to herself, who disappeared one morning without explanation. I walked through the rooms with careful steps, my footsteps echoing against hardwood floors that creaked in all the wrong places. Each room held that same lavender scent, growing stronger near certain corners, fading to nothing near the windows. It was as if the smell had mapped itself to specific memories embedded in the walls. In the living room, I found the first inconsistency. A coffee cup sat on the side table, still bearing the faint ring of liquid that had long since evaporated. The ceramic was cold to the touch, but not dusty like everything else. Someone had been here recently, or perhaps the house itself was playing tricks on perception. The agent had called me about this place after I mentioned I was looking for something quiet, something isolated. She said it would be perfect for someone who valued privacy. Her voice on the phone carried an undertone I couldn't identify, something between relief and reluctance. When I asked about the previous tenant, she became vague, mentioning only that the situation had been resolved and the property was available immediately. I moved upstairs, drawn by that persistent lavender scent. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step announcing my presence to whatever might be listening. The second floor felt different, more intimate somehow, as if I was trespassing on private thoughts rather than empty rooms. The bedroom at the end of the hall held the strongest concentration of that familiar smell. I stood in the doorway, reluctant to cross the threshold. The room was sparse, containing only a bed with rumpled sheets and a dresser with one drawer slightly ajar. Sunlight filtered through gauze curtains, casting everything in a hazy, dreamlike quality. I approached the dresser with hesitation. The open drawer revealed nothing but a few scattered items, a hairpin, a tube of lipstick, a small bottle of perfume. I lifted the perfume bottle and the lavender scent intensified, but when I examined the label, it read something else entirely. The contradiction made my head swim. The sheets on the bed were wrinkled as if someone had recently slept there, yet they felt cold and slightly damp. I found myself wondering if the previous tenant had left suddenly, in the middle of the night perhaps, abandoning her belongings and her life here without warning. Downstairs, I discovered more anomalies. The refrigerator hummed with electricity, though it had supposedly been disconnected. Inside, I found a carton of milk that should have spoiled long ago, yet showed no signs of age. The expiration date was smudged beyond recognition. I called the real estate agent, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Her recorded message sounded different from the woman I had spoken with earlier, younger somehow, with an accent I hadn't noticed before. I left a message asking about the utilities, about the previous tenant's belongings, about when exactly the house had been vacated. The response came not as a returned call, but as a knock at the door. A woman stood on the front porch, claiming to be from the property management company. She was older than the voice I remembered, with graying hair and tired eyes that avoided direct contact with mine. She explained that there had been some confusion about the timeline, that the previous tenant had left more recently than initially indicated. When I asked about the woman's disappearance, she corrected me, saying there had been no disappearance, only a sudden relocation for personal reasons. But her story felt rehearsed, as if she had told it many times before and was growing weary of the repetition. She kept glancing toward the stairs, toward the bedroom where the lavender scent lingered strongest. When I mentioned the smell, her face went pale. After she left, I found myself drawn back to that upstairs bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand why the lavender scent felt so familiar, so personal. It was then that I noticed the photograph tucked beneath the mattress, just the corner visible. The picture showed a woman standing in this very room, but the room looked different somehow. The wallpaper was newer, the furniture arranged differently. The woman's face was turned away from the camera, but something about her posture, her silhouette, stirred a recognition I couldn't place. I studied the photograph for what felt like hours, searching for clues about who she was, when the picture was taken, why it had been hidden. The lavender scent seemed to pulse around me, growing stronger whenever I looked at the woman's image. That night I dreamed of walking through the house, but it was different in the dream. The rooms were fuller, lived in, warm with the presence of someone who belonged there. I could hear footsteps above me when I was downstairs, below me when I was upstairs, always just out of sight. I woke to find the lavender scent had intensified, filling the entire house with its cloying sweetness. The photograph was no longer tucked under the mattress, but lay open on the dresser, as if someone had been examining it during the night. The next morning brought another visit from the property management representative, but this time it was a different woman entirely. She was younger, matching the voice I remembered from our original phone conversation. When I mentioned the previous day's visit, she looked confused, insisting that no one from her office had been to the property recently. She had no record of any photograph, no knowledge of personal belongings left behind. According to her files, the house had been empty for months, thoroughly cleaned and prepared for new tenants. But when we walked through the rooms together, she seemed as puzzled as I was by the coffee cup, the rumpled sheets, the persistent lavender scent. I began to suspect that the truth about this house, about the woman who lived here, was being deliberately obscured, but by whom and why remained unclear. Each person I spoke with offered a different version of events, none of which aligned with the others. The local postmaster mentioned seeing mail delivered to the house recently, letters addressed to a woman whose name he couldn't quite remember. The grocery store clerk recalled a regular customer who matched the description of the previous tenant, someone who always bought the same items, who paid in cash, who stopped coming in without explanation. But when I pressed for details, their memories became vague, contradictory. It was as if the woman had existed in the spaces between certainty, real enough to be remembered but too ephemeral to be clearly defined. I found myself spending more time in that upstairs bedroom, drawn by the mystery of the photograph and the intensifying lavender scent. I began to notice other details, a slight depression in the mattress that suggested regular use, dust patterns on the dresser that indicated recent disturbance, a faint outline on the wall where something had hung for a long time before being removed. The house was telling me a story, but in a language I was still learning to understand. Each clue seemed to contradict the last, creating a narrative that shifted depending on how I chose to interpret the evidence. One afternoon, while examining the photograph more closely, I noticed something I had missed before. In the background, barely visible, was a reflection in the dresser mirror. Another person, the photographer perhaps, captured inadvertently in the image. The reflection was too blurred to make out features, but something about the posture, the way the light fell across the figure, felt disturbingly familiar. I held the photograph up to the same mirror, trying to recreate the angle to understand the perspective. As I stood there, matching my position to the reflection, the lavender scent suddenly shifted, becoming something else entirely. Something sharper, more chemical, tinged with an undertone that made my stomach turn. The realization came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet settling of understanding, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper places. The photograph wasn't a memento left behind by the previous tenant. It was evidence of something else entirely, something that had been carefully staged to look like abandonment. I stared at my own reflection in the dresser mirror, seeing not just my current self, but the shadow of that blurred figure captured in the photograph. The lavender scent, I understood now, wasn't coming from perfume or sachets hidden in closets. It was covering something else, masking an odor that would have told a very different story. The house felt different now, heavier with the weight of what it had witnessed. I found myself questioning not just the official story of the previous tenant's disappearance, but my own role in discovering this place, my own memories of how I had come to be here. Had I really responded to a real estate listing, or had I been guided here by something more deliberate? The agent's changing story, the contradictory witnesses, the carefully preserved scene upstairs, it all suggested a level of orchestration that made me wonder who was really investigating whom. I left the house that evening, but the lavender scent followed me, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my skin. It had become part of me now, a reminder of questions that would never be fully answered, of a truth that remained just beyond reach. The photograph sits on my desk as I write this, the blurred reflection staring back at me with eyes I'm no longer certain aren't my own. The lavender scent has faded, replaced by the ordinary smells of my own life, but sometimes in quiet moments I catch a trace of it again, and I remember that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some doors are meant to stay closed, and some reflections are better left unexamined. Story 9. My fingertips skimmed the splintered railing as I descended the narrow staircase. The air was thick, carrying a scent of forgotten years and dust. With each step, the creak beneath my feet felt more like a low whisper, a rhythmic persuasion urging caution. The wood beneath my touch was smooth and worn, like an old melody played too often. I paused, sensing something shift, a change in the silence, an invitation or a warning. The echo of my last footfall lingered, deeper than it should have been. The basement smelled of copper pennies and old newspapers. I remember thinking that at the time, though now I wonder if I'm remembering correctly. Memory has a way of reshaping itself, doesn't it? Like clay in restless hands, the smell could have been anything, could have been nothing at all. She used to fold her laundry on Wednesdays, always Wednesdays. I know this because I watched from the kitchen window while washing dishes, the soap bubbles catching light in ways that made everything seem softer. Her movements were precise, methodical. The way she snapped each shirt before hanging it on the line, the way she smoothed wrinkles with her palms, I found comfort in that rhythm. The detective asked me about the shovel. Why would he ask about a shovel? Everyone has garden tools. Everyone has dirt under their fingernails sometimes. I told him about the roses, how they needed deeper holes than most people think. Roots need room to breathe, to spread. He wrote something in his notebook, and I wondered what words he chose to capture that simple truth. There's a stain on the basement floor that looks like a bird in flight. I discovered it after moving the old trunk, the one that belonged to my grandmother. The wood was heavier than expected, and when I dragged it aside, there it was, dark against the concrete, shaped like wings spread wide, caught in some eternal moment between earth and sky. I keep returning to that Wednesday, the way the light fell across her face when she turned toward my window. Did she see me watching? Her expression was unreadable, neither friendly nor hostile, just aware. That's the word that haunts me now, aware. The phone rang 17 times before I answered. I counted each ring, letting it fill the silence between my heartbeats. The voice on the other end was measured, professional. Questions about schedules, about habits, about the last time I'd seen her hanging laundry in the backyard. I answered truthfully, though truth feels slippery when spoken aloud to strangers. In the basement I found a button, small, white, with 4 holes arranged like dots on dice. It could have fallen from anything, belonged to anyone, but I recognized it immediately, though I can't say why. Recognition isn't always logical. Sometimes it lives in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause before understanding arrives. She stopped hanging laundry on Wednesdays. I noticed the absence like a missing tooth, tongue constantly probing the empty space. The clothesline hung bare, swaying slightly in breezes that seemed colder without her presence. I found myself standing at the kitchen window longer than necessary, waiting for a routine that would never resume. The detective returned with different questions about soil composition, about the difference between disturbed and undisturbed earth. I explained about aeration, about how roots need oxygen to survive, how sometimes you have to break ground to help things grow. He nodded, but his eyes held a skepticism that made my skin feel too tight. There's something about basements that changes sound. Words echo differently, footsteps carry farther than they should. I spent hours down there after she disappeared, organizing tools, rearranging boxes. The work felt necessary, though I couldn't articulate why. Purpose doesn't always announce itself clearly. The stain grew darker over time, or perhaps I simply noticed it more. Each trip to the basement, my eyes would find it immediately, that bird-shaped mark on the concrete. I considered scrubbing it away, but something held me back. Some stains tell stories that shouldn't be erased. Her husband came by asking questions. Polite questions, neighborly questions. Had I seen anything unusual, heard anything strange? I offered coffee and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast while watching his wife fold laundry. The irony wasn't lost on me, though I kept that observation to myself. The shovel blade was clean when they examined it. I'd always been careful about maintenance, about keeping tools in proper condition. Dirt corrodes metal, and rust spreads like infection if left unchecked. The detective seemed disappointed by this attention to detail, as if cleanliness itself had become suspicious. I dream about that staircase now, the one leading to the basement. In dreams, it stretches longer than it should, each step multiplying as I descend. The whispers grow louder, more insistent. When I wake, my fingertips ache as if I've been gripping something too tightly, though my hands are empty. The button sits on my nightstand now. I moved it from the basement after the third visit from investigators. Such a small thing to carry such weight. 4 holes, white plastic, probably mass-produced in factories I'll never see. Yet it feels significant in ways I can't explain to others, barely understand myself. They found her eventually, not where anyone expected, not where the questions had been leading. The discovery changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Vindication tastes different than anticipated, less sweet, more complicated, like medicine that cures one ailment while creating another. The basement feels different now, emptier though nothing has been removed. The stain remains, that bird frozen in concrete flight. I've stopped trying to understand its origin. Some mysteries are meant to persist, to remind us that answers don't always bring peace. Her husband moved away without saying goodbye. I watched the moving truck from my kitchen window, the same window where I'd observed his wife's Wednesday rituals. The new people who bought the house don't hang laundry outside. They use machines for everything, efficiency over ritual. The detective closed his notebook for the final time, apologized for the inconvenience. Inconvenience, such a small word for such a large disruption. I accepted his apology gracefully, though part of me had grown accustomed to the questions, the scrutiny. Purpose, even unwelcome purpose, leaves a void when it departs. I still descend those basement stairs regularly. The wood still creaks, still whispers cautions I don't fully understand. My fingertips know every splinter in that railing now, every smooth patch worn by countless hands. The familiarity is both comfort and curse. The truth about what happened that Wednesday lives somewhere between memory and imagination, between certainty and doubt. I've stopped trying to separate them. Truth, like stains, takes whatever shape the surface allows, and some surfaces, I've learned, are more porous than others. The button catches lamplight when I turn it between my fingers, 4 small holes creating tiny shadows on my palm. Such a simple thing, yet it connects me to a story I may never fully understand. Connection doesn't require comprehension. Sometimes it just requires presence, patience, the willingness to hold questions without demanding answers. The basement waits below, patient as stone, keeping its secrets in the space between floorboards and earth. Story 10. It wasn't the first time the curtains seemed to blow inward when all else was still. Each time I dusted the sill, the metal latch felt slightly warmer, as if recently turned, though I never saw it move. The streetlight cast its pale reflection on the glass, quivering gently. I noticed the occasional footsteps on the gravel outside, echoing in the quiet, but they never lingered long enough to mean anything. The carpet showed a faint trail, like a suggestion of someone passing, but it could have been my own. I turned off the lamp each evening, knowing full well it wasn't really dark. The logical explanation came to me gradually, the way understanding often does when you're not forcing it. My neighbor had been having problems with her husband for months. I'd heard the raised voices through the thin walls, the sound of doors slamming, car engines starting at odd hours. She worked late shifts at the hospital, coming home when most people were settling into sleep. That explained the footsteps on the gravel, the way shadows moved past my window at unexpected times. The night she disappeared, I remember hearing her car pull into the driveway around midnight. The engine cut off with that particular cough her old sedan made, then silence. I was reading in bed, barely paying attention to the familiar sounds of someone coming home late. The next morning, her husband knocked on my door, worry creasing his face like paper. She hadn't come home, he said. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Had I seen or heard anything unusual? I told him about the car, about hearing her return. He thanked me, said it helped establish a timeline. The police came later, asking the same questions. I repeated what I'd heard, what I'd seen from my bedroom window, the headlights sweeping across my wall, the familiar silhouette of her getting out of the car, walking toward their front door. It all made perfect sense. But there were details that didn't quite align, small things that nagged at me like a splinter you can't quite locate. The smell in my kitchen the morning after, faint but distinct, like wet earth and something metallic. I'd opened all the windows, thinking maybe a pipe had leaked somewhere, but found nothing. The coffee mug on my counter, positioned differently than I remembered leaving it, turned so the handle faced left instead of right. Such a small thing, but I'm particular about these details. Then there was the matter of my shoes. I always left them by the front door, aligned perfectly parallel. That morning they were slightly askew, and there were traces of that same dark soil on the soles. I must have walked through the garden the evening before, I reasoned, though I couldn't recall doing so. The mind plays tricks when you're tired, when routine blurs the edges of memory. The investigation continued for weeks. They found her car abandoned miles away, keys still in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to suggest violence. Just an empty vehicle and a woman who had vanished between the time she left work and the time she was supposed to arrive home. Except I'd heard her come home. I was certain of it. My certainty began to waver when I noticed other things. The spare key to my house, the one I kept hidden under the loose brick by the back door, was missing. I'd checked for it one morning, some instinct driving me to verify it was still there, and found only empty space. When had I last seen it? I couldn't remember. Maybe I'd moved it myself. Maybe I'd thrown it away during one of my periodic cleaning frenzies. The dreams started around then, vivid and disorienting. I would find myself standing in my kitchen in the middle of the night, not remembering how I'd gotten there. My hands would be dirty, fingernails caked with soil, though I hadn't been gardening. The taste of copper filled my mouth, and somewhere in the distance I could hear someone crying. But when I woke up properly, back in my own bed, everything was normal. Just dreams, I told myself, stress manifesting in strange ways. There were moments when I caught glimpses of something else, another version of that night flickering at the edges of my consciousness like heat lightning. In these flashes, I wasn't lying in bed reading when the car arrived. I was outside, standing in the shadow of the oak tree that separated our properties. The air was thick with humidity, and I could smell rain approaching, mixing with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. In this other version, she didn't get out of the car immediately. She sat there for several minutes, engine off, just breathing in the darkness. I could see her silhouette through the windshield, head tilted back against the headrest. When she finally emerged, she moved differently than usual, slower, more deliberate. She looked directly at where I was standing, though I was certain she couldn't see me in the shadows. But that couldn't be right. I would remember being outside. I would remember the feeling of grass under my feet, the way the night air moved against my skin. These were sensations too vivid to forget, too physical to dismiss, yet they felt more like memories recovered than memories imagined. The husband moved away a month later. I helped him load boxes into a rental truck, making small talk about new beginnings and fresh starts. He seemed relieved, almost eager to leave, though he tried to mask it with appropriate sadness. As he drove away, I noticed he'd left behind a few things: a garden spade leaning against the back porch, a pair of work gloves on the windowsill, a small pile of lime near the tool shed. I found myself walking through their empty house that evening, using the key he'd forgotten to ask for back. The rooms echoed with absence, but also with something else, something that made my skin prickle with recognition. In the bedroom, the carpet showed indentations where furniture had stood, but also other marks, scuff marks that suggested something heavy had been dragged across the floor. The basement smelled of fresh concrete, though the house was decades old. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the subtle difference in texture where new work had been done. My fingers seemed to know exactly where to touch, as if they'd traced this path before. The sensation was so strong it made me dizzy, and I had to grip the handrail to keep from falling. That night I dreamed I was mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow, the consistency thick and gray like oatmeal. My arms ached from the work, and sweat dripped into my eyes despite the cool night air. Someone was helping me, but I couldn't see their face, only their hands as they held things steady, passed me tools, whispered encouragement in a voice I almost recognized. When I woke, my muscles were sore in places that made no sense. My lower back, my shoulders, the muscles in my forearms that would strain from repetitive lifting and pouring. I told myself I'd slept wrong, that the old mattress was finally taking its toll on my body, but deep down I knew the soreness felt too specific, too purposeful to be explained by sleep position. The police called me in for another interview, just routine follow-up, they said. They asked the same questions, and I gave the same answers, but this time the detective watched my face more carefully. Did I know about the work that had been done in the basement next door? Had I heard any construction sounds, seen any delivery trucks? I told them no, which was true as far as I could consciously remember. But my hands trembled slightly as I spoke, and I had to press them flat against my thighs to keep them still. Months passed. The house next door remained empty, a for sale sign growing weathered in the front yard. I found myself drawn to the windows that faced their property, watching for movement that never came. Sometimes, late at night, I thought I saw lights in the basement, just a faint glow seeping through the small ground-level windows, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. The curtains in my living room continued to move when the air was still. I replaced the window latch, thinking it might be loose, but the new hardware felt just as warm to the touch, just as recently turned. I began to wonder if the movement came from inside rather than outside, if something in my house was creating the disturbance rather than something beyond it. I started keeping a journal, trying to track the inconsistencies, the small displacements that seemed to happen without my knowledge. Coffee cups moved, shoes shifted position, dirt appeared under my fingernails. The spare key remained missing, but sometimes I found mud on the back doormat, as if someone had used the entrance recently. The handwriting in my journal sometimes looked unfamiliar, though it was certainly mine. The words were the same, but the pressure of the pen was different, the slant of the letters slightly altered. One evening I found a receipt in my jacket pocket for concrete mix and lime, dated the night she disappeared. The store name was familiar, a place I'd driven past countless times but never entered. The receipt was weathered as if it had been handled frequently, folded and unfolded many times. My signature was at the bottom, but I had no memory of making the purchase, no recollection of being in that store on that night or any other. The two versions of events began to blur together, creating a narrative that made sense from neither perspective. In one version, I was an innocent neighbor who happened to witness her return home. In the other, I was something else entirely, someone whose involvement went deeper than observation. But which version was real? And if I couldn't trust my own memory, how could I trust anything at all? The truth seemed to exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt, in the moments when consciousness wavered and something else took control. I began to suspect that the person who mixed concrete in my dreams and the person who testified to police were not quite the same individual, though they shared the same body, the same voice, the same confused and frightening existence. Standing at my window now, watching those curtains move in still air, I wonder if the real crime isn't what happened to her, but what happened to me. The loss of reliable memory, the fracturing of identity, the inability to distinguish between what I've done and what I've witnessed. Perhaps we're both missing in different ways, both disappeared into the same dark space where truth becomes negotiable and reality splits into parallel possibilities that can never be reconciled. The streetlight continues to cast its pale reflection on the glass, quivering gently, and I turn off the lamp each evening, knowing full well it isn't really dark.